Music. From a distance, he saw the door of an old shack banging loosely in the wind. He walked closer, planning to tie it shut to prevent a wildfire. But when he pushed it open, the stench of rot mixed with dried blood hit him like a wall. In the corner of the shack, an Apache woman sat slumped against the wall, her eyes wide open, but lifeless. Her thin legs were bound with a frayed rope, and bruised wounds along her shins had already begun to fester. In front of her sat a bull, bone dry for who knows how long. Elias stood still for a beat. The girl wheezed faintly, gripping a small piece of leather in her hand. When his shadow fell across her, she turned her head to look, eyes black as ash, filled with both fear and resignation. "Do you still want to live?" Elias asked, his voice rough but firm. There was no reply, only a slow blink. He drew his knife and cut the rope, then lifted her into his arms. She was too light, like a dry branch. Yet her body, lean and solid, showed she had once been a warrior. "Let's go," Elias said, placing her on the saddle. "If you die out here, no one will ever know." The wind kicked up dust around them as he spurred the horse toward the ranch. Behind them, the old shack leaned in silence, a mute witness to a tragedy yet to be told. When they reached the ranch, Elias dismounted and carried the girl into the cabin. The simple wooden room was bathed in soft evening light pouring through the cracks in the door, casting their shadows across the floor. He laid her gently on the narrow bed and pulled a blanket up to her chest. She did not resist, but her hand still clutched the piece of leather, her knuckles pale from strain. Elias lit the fire, poured some cornmeal into boiling water. The faint scent of thin porridge spread through the room. He placed the bowl on the table, pulled out a chair, and lit a cigarette. He said nothing. After a long while, she managed to sit up, her arms trembling. Her dark eyes tracked Elias like a wounded animal watching a stranger. She reached out for the bowl and drank in slow sips, never taking her eyes off him. "You are not going to die," Elias said quietly. "Not turning around, at least not tonight." She did not answer. She set the bowl down and hugged the piece of leather to her chest again. When the sun had fully set, Elias brought over a bucket of warm water and placed it on the floor. "Wash up," he said, pointing to a clean cloth. She hesitated, then bent forward to wipe the dried blood from her face. As the grime came off, it revealed sharp features and hardened eyes. This was no weak soul, but a warrior who had been brought down. Night fell. The wind whistled through the cracks in the walls. An owl called from across the field. Elias lay stretched out on the long bench, his gun within arm's reach. In the dark, he heard her shifting. She did not sleep, only leaned her head against the wall, eyes fixed on the window. Every noise from the yard made her tense as if ready to bolt. Even though her legs could no longer carry her, Elias opened his eyes and looked at her silhouette against the wall, small but drawn tight like a bowring. "No one is coming for your life here," he said hoarsely, his voice calm, almost like talking to himself. Silence, only the wind answered. Around midnight, Elias sat up at the sound of a dry cough. He got up, poured some water, and handed it to her. She took it and for the first time whispered a faint word barely audible. "Thank you." I nodded and returned to his place. That night the cabin held two rhythms of breath, one deep, one shallow, but together they kept the fire from going out. The next morning, golden sunlight streamed through the cabin window. Elias opened the door, letting the early breeze drift in and sweep out the scent of smoke. The Apache girl still sat on the bed, her back against the wall, clutching the piece of leather. Her dark eyes tracked Elias's every move, still weary, but no longer gripped by the panic she had shown the day before. "You cannot stay in bed forever," Elias said quietly, then stepped outside. All morning, the sounds of sawing and hammering echoed from the yard. By noon, Elias came back into the cabin carrying a wooden frame mounted on two old wagon wheels. "Try sitting in this." She eyed the strange contraption with hesitation. Elias stepped forward and helped her into it. The wooden chair creaked, but it held firm. He handed her the wheels. "Push." She gave it a try. Awkward at first, but the chair moved a short distance. For a brief moment, a faint smile crossed her sun-darkened face. It was the first change in expression Elias had seen. That afternoon, Elias brought her out onto the porch. She practiced wheeling across the uneven ground. Sweat gathered on her brow, but she did not stop. Each time the wheels snagged in a rut, she gritted her teeth and forced them through. Elias stood nearby, saying nothing, simply watching. By the time the sun began to set, she stopped at the water trough. The gray horse stepped over to sniff her, and she reached out to stroke its mane. In that quiet moment, I stood a few paces away and saw something in her eyes, the light of someone who had just reclaimed a sliver of freedom. That evening, Elias added another chair to the cabin, placing it near the fire. She sat in her wheelchair, turning the leather piece in her hands. But for the first time, she set it down on the table instead of holding it tight. "Tomorrow," Elias said, his voice low, "I need to fix the fence. You can hold the nails for me." She looked at him for a beat, then gave a small nod. No words, but it was the clearest answer Elias had ever gotten from her. The firelight cast their shadows onto the wall, one tall and lean, the other seated in a wheelchair like two lost souls who had just found a reason to stay under the same roof. That afternoon, the sky darkened without warning, and rain came pouring down as if tearing through the parched land. The cabin dimmed, wind driving water through the cracks in the door, and the scent of wet earth flooded in. Elias stoked the fire higher, and the room glowed red and warm. The girl sat in her wheelchair, silently, watching the flames. Her shoulders were tense, as if bracing against a storm, not just outside, but within herself. "Do you have a name?" Elias asked, his deep voice breaking the silence. She nodded slowly. "Tina." Elias repeated the name, tasting the unfamiliar sound on his tongue. "It is beautiful." T looked down at her calloused hands. Her voice no louder than the wind. "My father gave me that name when I was born. It means one who stands firm. But ever since my legs failed, they started calling me Burden. The tribe left me beyond the borderland when the dry season came. They said I should find my own way to die." Elias was quiet. Rain lashed the wooden roof like a whip. He slowly sat down across from her, eyes never leaving her face. "I lost everything once," he said. "My wife died during the plague. My son followed not long after. I sold off the herd and stayed here, just working to forget." Silence settled again. The fire popped and crackled, casting their shadows on the wall. Two strangers slowly starting to see each other. Tina turned her face away, but her voice trembled. "I used to think no one would ever pick up a crippled woman unless it was to make her a slave." Elias leaned forward. "I do not need a slave here. All you need to do is live. The rest we will figure out." A streak of lightning tore across the sky, lighting up Tina's face. Rain slipped through the crack in the door, trailing down the wooden floor. She wiped it quickly, then let out a soft laugh. The first brief but real. Elias leaned back in his chair, watching her a little longer than necessary. That night, though, rain tapped steadily on the roof. The cabin no longer felt like a dark place. It felt like shelter, not just from the storm outside, but from the storms that had haunted them for years. "I am truly grateful for your presence here. If this story reminded you of the old days, those dusty afternoons, the sound of hooves echoing in your heart, then go ahead and subscribe to my channel so each day we can sit together again. And I will tell you another story from the Wild West." The next morning, the sky was clear after the night's rain. The ground was still damp, carrying the earthy scent of wild grass. Tekina wheeled the wooden chair out into the yard for the first time under the morning sunday. The light touched her sun-darkened face, revealing faint scars across her temple. Elias was repairing fence posts. He glanced over and saw her stop by the wood pile. Picking up each piece of firewood and stacking them neatly, her muscular arms tensed, shoulders leaning forward, Tekina was showing that she was not a burden. As the sun rose higher, sweat beaded along her temple, but she did not stop. Elias walked over and set a canteen beside her. That is enough. You are running a fever again. Tina lifted her chin. I do not want to just sit inside. Elias gave a slight nod and returned to his work. He did not stop her again. That afternoon, Tina rolled her chair closer to the main road where red dust blurred the distant horizon. A stranger on horseback rode by, pulled up, and stared at her. A crippled __, he sneered using the slur with a mocking grin. Tina held her head high. Her dark eyes did not flinch. Move on, she said, her voice cold as steel. The man laughed louder, about to say more when footsteps sounded behind him. Elias stood there, his rifle slung loosely over one shoulder, his gray eyes steady and hard. Something funny going on here? He asked evenly. The man fell silent. The tension between Elias and the rider stretched taut like wire. At last, the man cleared his throat and spurred his horse away. Tina watched him go, then turned back. Elias had not moved, not said a word. You did not need to step in, she said quietly. I did not, Elias replied. Just stood behind. They held each other's gaze for a long moment. For the first time, Tina let her shoulders ease. The wheelchair turned back toward the cabin, its wheels rolling smooth across the dirt. That night, with the fire flickering in the stove, Tina left the piece of leather on the table, no longer clutching it to her chest. Elias glanced at it briefly, then sat across from her. Tomorrow I will build you a lower worked, he said. So you will not have to bend. Tina looked up and in her dark eyes was a light that words could not quite name. For the first time, she nodded like a silent thank you. The next day, before the sun had fully risen, Elias was already carrying fresh wooden planks out into the yard. Tina followed in her wheelchair, pulling along a bucket of nails and a hammer. Give it to me, she said, holding out her hand. Elias raised an eyebrow, but handed her the short-handled hammer. Tina leaned forward and began driving nails into the board. Each strike was not strong, but it was sure. Elias stood beside her, securing the upper plank. They worked in silence, the sounds of hammering and wood tapping like a steady heartbeat. By late afternoon, the cattle pen had a brand new fence. Elias planted his hands on his hips, sweat running down his neck. Tina rolled back a little, inspecting the work, the corner of her mouth curving slightly. Not bad, she said, brief and to the point. Elias let out a quiet chuckle. That might be the first compliment I have ever heard from you. As the late sun turned golden, they sat together on the front steps. Elias handed her the canteen. His calloused hand brushed lightly against her fingers, a fleeting touch, but it made both of their hearts pause for a beat. That night, the cabin glowed with firelight. Elias added more wood to the stove, then took a seat across from Tina. She let her thick black hair down, and it fell across her shoulders, carrying the scent of smoke and sweat from a long day. Elias poured her a small cup of whiskey. A sip, it will help you sleep. Tina took a small taste. The fire's glow reflected in her dark eyes, making them shine like embers. She set the cup down and looked at Elias longer than necessary. Why did you save me that day? She asked. Elias was quiet for a while, then answered. Because I know what it feels like to be left behind. The room fell still. Tina pushed her chair a little closer. The space between them narrowed to a single breath. For the first time, Elias reached out, gently, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. She did not pull away. The kiss came slowly, not awkward, not rushed, as if both had been waiting for it far too long. When they parted, Tina tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes no longer wary, but deep and warm. Tomorrow, Elias said softly, his voice growly. We will take the cattle out to the southern field. You can help me check the pasture. Tina nodded. That night, the fire burned longer than usual, and the cabin no longer felt like a temporary shelter. It had begun to feel like home. 2 days later, while Elias was checking the water trough in the yard, the thunder of hooves echoed in the distance. A group of men from town rode up, kicking up clouds of red dust. Leading them was Foreman, the head of the town council. "Ward," Foreman barked, pulling his horse to a halt at the gate. "We heard you are harboring a crippled SQU out here. You know the law. Apaches are not allowed on this land." Elias slowly set the water bucket down and wiped his hands on his pants. "She is my guest. No one touches her." "Guest? Huh." Foreman spat on the ground. "People like her only bring trouble. Last night, some cattle went missing near the creek. Folks in town think someone from her tribe got tipped off." Tina wheeled herself out from the cabin. The late sun cast lines of shadow across her face, highlighting the veins in her strong arms. "I did not warn anyone," she said firmly. Foreman let out a dry laugh. "So, you speak our language. Good. Then listen close. Leave before the moon rises. Or we will drag you out." Elia stepped forward, one hand resting on the grip of his gun. "She stays. This is my land. Anyone crosses that fence will be in the dirt before sunrise." The air turned heavy. The other men glanced at one another. Foreman grunted, turned his horse. "You are asking for trouble, Ward. Tonight will not be quiet." As the group rode off, Takina turned her chair toward Elias. "You did not have to do that. They will come back." Elias looked at her for a long moment, his gaze cold and sharp. "If you leave, I lose this ranch. If you stay, at least I have something worth protecting." Tina gripped the wheel tightly and took a deep breath. "Then I will stay." That evening, Elias checked every round of ammunition and bolted the windows shut. Tina sat by the fire, sharpening a short blade, her hands steady, her eyes no longer afraid. For the first time, they were not just the rescuer and the rescued. They were two people preparing for battle, standing shoulder to shoulder. That night, the wind howled through the darkness, and even the insects seemed to fall silent. Elias sat close to the window, his Winchester resting across his lap. Tina sat by the fire, a short knife strapped to her side. Her eyes calm, eerily calm. The sound of horses echoed in the distance, growing louder with every second. Torches flickered outside the cabin. 4 men and nearly a dozen men had surrounded the house. "Ward," the shout rang out. "Bring the woman out. This is your last chance." Elias unlocked the door and stepped onto the porch. "Go home, boys. There is no one here for you." One burly man raised his gun and fired into the air. "Drag her out and we can all be home before sunrise." Gunfire erupted. Elias ducked behind a porch beam and returned fire. His shot clipped the hat clean off the man who had just fired. The gang scattered, shouting and yelling across the yard. Tina crawled out from the cabin, sliding a fresh clip toward Elias. "You are not alone." The gunfight lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. Finally, a bullet grazed Elias's shoulder, soaking his shirt with blood. But just as he chambered another round, Foreman raised a hand and shouted, "Enough! Back off!" The men pulled their horses back, eyes still fixed on Elias and Ta, both standing firm in the doorway. Foreman spat into the dirt, his voice tight with venom. "You chose your side, Ward. Do not regret it." They rode off, leaving behind smoke, dust, and the stinging scent of gunpowder. Elias leaned on his knee, breathing heavy. Tina wheeled closer, wrapped a clean strip of cloth around his wound. "You kept your word," she whispered. Elias looked at her, gray eyes, tired but unwavering. "From now on, this is your home. No one touches you." At sunrise, the first light swept across the field. Tina rolled out to the porch and sat beside Elias. Together they watched the cattle wander through the dewy grass, the morning sun gilding her dark hair. For the first time, Elias saw his cabin not as a lonely outpost, but as something worth defending. And Takina, her hand steady on the wheel, her face softened. She was no longer someone left behind. She had chosen to stay. "My friend, true love is not afraid of dust or gunfire. It survives beyond judgment and old scars just to let two people wake up side by side with the rising Sunday. Kindness is the final thread that binds us together. When we reach out to save a stranger, we are also saving the last good part of ourselves. I hope that wherever you are in the world, You are healthy and happy. I love you all, my dear audience of Wild West storytelling. Let me know how you felt about this story. Leave a comment down below. Type 1 if you enjoyed this story, and do not forget to subscribe channel for more dramatic tales from the wild.